Hello everyone, it's FCA. Today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite things, and that is wine. Now this particular wine is Tempranillo, and it's from Spain. Exciting, and it's from the company Lucky Duck. It's a 2012. I'm going to dispel some wine myths and then tell you some food and wine pairings that go really well together, because people have issues with that. So wine myth number one is that wine ages well. To a point. Most wines like this, or like Chardonnay, White Zinfandel, Sauvignon Blanc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Moscato, things like that, those don't age well. Once they are like this on the shelf, they are at their peak of flavor, peak of drinking. They do not need to be aged anymore. They have already done all the aging that needs to occur to make the flavor in this perfect for that type of wine, for that type of grape, and for that type of vinification. Vinification is the winemaker's art, or the process of making wine. Now, the type of wine that does age well after you've already purchased it, or at least it doesn't age well, but it doesn't change a whole lot, is Vermouth. Now this is dry Vermouth, which all Vermouths are made from white wines, but sweet Vermouth tends to have a bit of a reddish brown kind of color to it, and as the name suggests, it is a little bit sweeter than this kind of Vermouth. It can last 3 to 6 months after it's been opened in a refrigerator and be perfectly fine. After that, the wine itself won't go bad, but all of the flavors will have dissipated. So with a regular table or dessert wine, such as Temprino or Trebbiano or something like that, those will go bad. White wines go bad a lot faster, except for Vermouth. And red wines have a little bit better staying power due to the tannin, which is the skin of the grape, and that is the reddish color in the skin of the grapes. So it's not the grapes themselves that are white or red, it is how long you leave the red or purple skin, which contains tannin, which is a bitter flavored pigmentation, in the wine that gives it a pink or red or deep kind of coloring that you would find in like a Burgundy or Bordeaux or something like that. So yeah, wine doesn't age. All the aging has already taken place. Next, the year is very important. When people say, oh, that's a good year for wine, or that's not a good year for wine, it's because that tells you the terroir, which means the slope, what's in the soil, and how the climate was. If it was rainy, if it was snowy, if it was a colder year, if it was a warmer year, if there was a lot of sun or a lot of overcast. And I'm sticking to my chair. Now, the reason why that's important is because if it's warmer or sunnier, it'll produce a fruitier wine. If it's sunnier, it'll be juicier. And if it's cold, the wines will develop off flavors such as green pepper. You get that a lot in Spain. If it gets too cold in a region that's just typically warm, you're going to get some icky taste in wine. Another thing people don't know is that the only place you can get champagne, well, it's not the only place you can get it from, but the only place that makes champagne is Champagne, France. Anything that has champagne on it, which is Champagne, champagne is only from the Champagne region of France. They have a permanent name holder for the name Champagne. True champagne only comes from Champagne, France. If you have something that says Champagne and it's from California or New York, somebody let that go through the system. That is a sparkling wine. It is not true champagne. Some people might say, oh, you're just being a snob about it. No, that's the way it actually is. Another thing you have to keep in mind is that all European wines are actually American anyway, because there was an aphid called Phylloxera, and Phylloxera went and it eats the roots and stems of vine wines. I mean, grape vines, wine vines. Well, I guess I don't know. But anyway, now in America, in the U.S. of A., North America, our plants have a natural resilience to aphids, and they have a natural repulsion against the aphids. However, in Europe, those plants did not have such a thing because there was no such thing as Phylloxera in Europe. Well, when we sent wines and vines over to France, Phylloxera traveled with the ride and destroyed every vine across the entire continent of Europe. Europe is a continent, not a country. France and the UK are countries within the continent of Europe, just to clarify. Alright, so now what has to happen is that every vine that is in Europe has been hand grafted with an American root so that the rest of the plant, so what happens is they have a special way of breaking a particular vine and then reattaching it so that it grows again. And that's how they have wine over in Europe. And if it wasn't, because it has that natural repulsion, that natural vines had all been eaten up by Phylloxera. It was a big problem. Devastating times. Can you imagine a time without wine? Talk about the Dark Ages, yes? Also, you're not supposed to get drunk off of wine. One, you'll have a terrible headache and tummy ache if you do. Two, you're supposed to enjoy the taste. Just like with a cocktail, you're not supposed to get drunk off of that stuff. You're supposed to enjoy the flavor. You're supposed to enjoy the taste and, the clarity, the bouquet, the brightness. That's what you're supposed to enjoy. You're supposed to really use your whole mouth. That's why the proper way to drink wine is to pour it into your glass, swirl it. Don't hold it like this. Hold it like this. Because when you hold it at the bottom, if you hold it like this, your hand is warming the wine, which will and does affect the flavor. So you swirl it, then you were supposed to go ahead, put your whole nose, even one as big as mine, just go ahead and stick it in there and take a good whiff, and it helps you get either a floral or a fruity kind of a scent, very much the way you would for the notes of perfume. And close your eyes and just take in everything. Does it smell woodsy? Does it have layers? Does it have legs? Legs are, if you swirl it and hold it up to the light, there will be lines around the glass. If you can see long, distinct lines, which you will with stuff like Chardonnays that are more oily and Pinot Grigios, you will get, that means that there's more alcohol. And it also tells you if it's more oily or more watery. Because if you get very distinct legs, then it's very oily. If you get more like water droplets on a window, then you have a more watery kind of wine. How it feels on the tongue, how heavy it is on the tongue. Like, can you really feel the weight on your tongue? The weight in your mouth? That goes into the taste. That's very important for the art of making wine. You also want to take in, is it pungent smelling? Does it smell acidic? Does it smell bitter? When you taste it, you want to swirl it around in your mouth so that it gets the back of you, the top of you, the roof of your mouth, all your palates. You want to make sure it gets all over your tongue, on the inside of your cheeks, the inside of your lip, and on the back of your throat. All those things have taste buds, and all of those taste buds will affect how it tastes. Another thing is you want to oxidize it while it's in your mouth, just a little bit. So just take a little sip and go, just a quick shot of air to help mix it in your mouth, and it really brings out intensity and flavors within the wine. And also, if you hold it up to a white napkin or a white tablecloth, you will be able to see the light going through it or not, and that will tell you if the clarity and brightness of the wine. Another way you can tell brightness is if you hold it up and just look. Can you see all the way through it? Can you tell the color? Burgundy wines tend to be darker but easier to see through, whereas Merlots tend to be more fuchsia colored, but they're harder to see through. Things like that. Gotta take that into effect. into account, not effect. Now I'm going to go into and tell you about the types of food and wine pairings. If you notice I'm looking over here, it's because I have notes that I've taken, because otherwise I'll start talking and I'll get all tongue twisted, and that won't be good for anybody. So most fish, other than red snapper and salmon and caviar, you can pair, and shellfish is included in that. So crab meat and lobster and oysters and clams and things like that. You can use Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio, or Chardonnay. Very, very tasty. How that works is most fishes are kind of oily and very intense of butter flavors and garlic flavors and things like that. Sauvignon Blanc has none of those flavors. It's a slightly buttery, but it's very, very dry. Not very oily at all. So it complements it. Or you can go along with the flavors, which Pinot Grigio and Chardonnay do very well for fish. Salmon, a very oily fish, but has a very juicy kind of taste and is often very moist. You would want to use something more like Pinot Noir, which is also very good for Chinese food because it's a spicy kind of wine. Pinot Noir is, and it's one of my favorite ones, and it goes really well with Chinese food because it brings out and complements all the spices that are associated. Or Merlot. Merlot is another red wine, and it's a little bit more dry. Pinot Noir and Merlot also work well for red snapper, which has a particularly spicy kind of taste and isn't so oily as it is heavy in the mouth as far as fish goes. And for caviar, stick with the C's. Go with champagne or sparkling wine, because as you know, champagne only comes from France. Everything else is sparkling wine. Everything else. For barbecue, Syrah. Stick yourself with Syrah, or you can roll a little Sauvignon Blanc. Syrah is a little bit better because it has a tad more spice to it, and so it will help bring out the flavor of barbecue even after eating, you know, a big barbecue chicken or rib or something like that. Roast, Cabernet Sauvignon. Cabernet Sauvignon is a very dry red, and roast is a very moist meat, very complimentary. For a hamburger, Syrah or Merlot for the same reasons as you would red snapper or barbecue. Duck, Chianti. Go with some Chianti. Lamb, Cabernet Sauvignon or Chianti or a Bordeaux, particularly a red Bordeaux. I don't even think there's any other kind besides red Bordeaux, but you know, I'm not a wine steward or a sommelier. I'm not one of those. Pork, Pinot Noir wins again. Pinot Noir is one of my favorite, and it goes along with a lot of foods because it brings out flavors because it's such a spicy wine. And Merlot will also be very good. Anywhere where you can throw a Merlot, you can pretty much throw a Pinot Noir or Syrah. In general. Not always, but in general. Chicken, stick with some Chardonnay. Chicken tends to be a bit more oily. It's very thick, so match it up with something that's just as thick and just as layered, such as Chardonnay. Turkey, Sauvignon Blanc, or a wonderful Zinfandel. Zinfandel is a rosé kind of a wine or a flushing wine, and it tends to be a little bit lighter and more water-based, so it helps complement the turkey's tryptophan. Pasta, Syrah and Chardonnay. Again, it matches the oily and intensity of layering of foods that is associated with pastas. Cheese, Cabernet Sauvignon or red Bordeaux. Those are very good because cheese is very thick and Cabernet Sauvignon is very dry, so those are complementary to each other. They bring out the umami in your tongue, which is the fifth flavor that's not salty, bitter, sweet, or acidic. Salty, sweet. Anyway, continuing on. Chocolate, Cabernet Sauvignon, or port. Port is an acquired taste, so I don't like it, but maybe you will. But both of those are very dry, whereas chocolate is very intense, and it helps bring out the sweetness in chocolate. And it also helps bring out the bitterness in dark chocolate. And for fresh fruit, stick with a fruity wine, Riesling. Alright, I hope you found that helpful, and I will talk to you all later. Bye!